Handcuffing people is difficult. We're going to look at why it's so difficult and how I think we can do better and improve training with plenty of real-life examples. The unique problem we have in handcuffing is that you have to control both arms and bring them together and hold them there while you reach for your handcuffs. At the same time, you may have to use your radio, communicate with bystanders, defend yourself from the person you're arresting or other people. We don't all have 3 or 4 arms, unfortunately, so it's a problem. Not using handcuffs at all is an option. Particularly if your backup isn't very far off, it may be better to employ both hands to just restrain them. And there are plenty of examples of offenders escaping while the cop fidgets with their handcuffs. A common point of failure is locking a cuff on one hand before positional control is established. When you have them standing, it can be tempting to grab one arm and just lock on that side first, but you're not going to have better control than you did before, and it can cause a tug of war. They can still have an arm free to punch you as well.
Now transpires that the rider had the bike key in his hand, so effectively the bike key is like this, or one of these fingers, so he's got his fist clenched with the bike key up, and he's taken a swing at Chris, which is then penetrated just in here.
If you do it on the ground without having positional control first, you end up with the same problem. Police tend to focus on grabbing at the wrists, partly because that's where the handcuffs go and they kind of get target fixation. But it's also a general training issue. They encourage this approach in training. If you watch their training videos and demonstrations, you'll notice that the vast majority use joint locks and holds of the wrist and arm to maintain control. They're trying to grab an extremity and use that to control the core and the rest of the body. A more reliable approach is to control their core and achieve good position so that you can isolate and control an extremity. Once you've gained positional control, you can make multiple attempts to get the handcuffs on, and it doesn't matter if you fail a few times because you remain in a controlling position after you fail. When you have positional control and lose control of an arm, you still have positional control to fall back on. If you have nothing but an arm and you lose it, now you have nothing. And it's not that controlling from the extremity to the core doesn't work. It can definitely work very well. It just requires very specific conditions. You'll notice that in combat sports where these techniques are legal, you don't see it very often, and it usually requires things like getting your opponent off balance and having their arm extended. It's rare to see because it's difficult to do. These situations don't appear very often, and when you do attempt and fail, you need something else to transition to and fall back on immediately. It should never make up your entire repertoire of techniques, but it's fine to train and have it as an option. It's usually a more reliable approach to work from the core to the extremity. Think of all the videos of street fights you've ever seen, all the combat sports you've ever watched. What percentage of them involved takedown and control where they were only holding the wrist or the arm? But just knowing all this isn't going to help without training. You cannot learn to swim out of water. If there's one thing you cannot take out of training, it's sparring. You ask any boxer, kickboxer, judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, MMA competitor, the one thing that is crucial and cannot be avoided to learn how to do the martial art and how to compete in their sport, it's sparring, and they will all say that. It also happens to be the one thing they do the least in police academies. They do a lot of drills, a lot of role play, or they do a very limited form of sparring where they're only permitted to use a small number of approved techniques that they've been shown. They're not allowed to improvise. If the sparring doesn't play out as intended, they stop the action, they correct the student and restart until they get it right. So what do I think the training should look like? Kind of like this, but not exactly. I'll explain. This is a Kozen Judo training session very closely related to Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Here we see someone has taken the back of their opponent. He's controlling the body so that he can work on attacking the neck. Just going straight for the choke without any positional control is very difficult, just like handcuffing people without positional control is difficult. And this allows him to attempt strangling techniques while his opponent doesn't really have many options aside from escape and defense. This is your foundation. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they have a saying, position before submission. And this is the fundamental principle that we should be emulating in handcuffing. But we're not working towards a submission, a choke or a joint lock. We're working towards getting the handcuffs on. Because the end goal is different, that means the specific techniques will be different and it will look different in practice. There are innumerable techniques you can train in submission grappling, and much of it you'll never use as a cop. There is limited time to train people at the academy, and they need to focus on what is relevant to them. You can't just import a martial art wholesale. The components we need to import are the principles of position and control and the introduction of free sparring in training. Once you implement these things, the rest will reveal itself as a product of sparring and application in reality, and it creates a feedback loop of self-improvement. In most combat sports, you're allowed to use any technique you like as long as it's within the overarching rule set, and this allows people to innovate. Students get advice from their instructors when they run into a problem. Then they go back and try it out in sparring to see what works for them. They slowly build up their skill set and their particular approach over time, and it's a process of discovery. In fact, if you can get something new to work that was never shown in class, everyone else is going to start doing it. The instructor might even start teaching it in class and name it after you. All effective martial arts systems are born from this kind of process. The fundamental skills have to evolve from the ground up, not the top down. When you train to a script, you are conditioned to expect the script to play out in reality. When you face reality and realize it's not going to work, and you don't know what to do next, it's hard not to panic. Fighting is not a linear series of events, it's a web of possibilities. This isn't how we teach police, instead it's very dogmatic. One of the problems is that handcuffs are really difficult to train with in sparring. It's a few pieces of steel with hinges and chains and right angle corners that you can cut yourself on. I've been trying to think of a design that is safe and you can go 100% without cutting your head open or getting something pinched in the moving parts. I made this thing. It looks a bit like a sex toy, but you get the idea. They can fight over it, wrestle for it, and hopefully not get injured. At the same time, they're fighting for control and position appropriate for handcuffing specifically. I'm sure there's probably better ways to make one, might be better designs out there. Feel free to copy it. You don't have to attribute it to me. I asked a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt to humour me and try this thing. This is Luke Martin. He owns Sydney West Martial Arts, which is one of the more elite grappling gyms in the country in my opinion. You can see he prioritises control of the body, transitioning from knee ride to mount to pin him on the ground, and then he gets to work isolating extremities. Contrast this with what we saw earlier where they grab at the arms and make no effort to control the core posture. He uses a gift wrap to hold one arm and uses the handcuffs to attempt to hook and drag the other arm. Before we talked about how locking one side first can turn out poorly, but here it's not a problem at all. Luke is able to make multiple attempts, try many different methods, and when it fails there are no serious consequences because he remains in positional control. You can try something like hooking one side. It might be a good idea because it's safe. In comparison, in the other examples we see that the arrestee escapes immediately once grips are broken. But here Luke remains calm. It's far easier to remain calm and avoid escalating force when you know there is a way forward. When you're out of ideas, when you feel like you're losing control, it isn't playing out like the script in training, you lose emotional control, not just physical control. I'll also point out that this is not a beginner he's trying it on. This is a student who has far more grappling experience than the majority of people you will ever see in the street. You can see he's grabbing at the handcuffs and frustrating the process. This is something that needs to be simulated because it happens in real life. Failure needs to be part of training. You should fail in every way possible, work on ways of recovering from that failure, and strategies to avoid getting there in the first place. Eventually he gets both wrists in the device and we call the end of the match. So I think we need this kind of training in police academies or something like it. What I'm saying ultimately is very simple. To get better at doing a thing, you have to do the thing. The missing ingredient is live training against resisting partners under a rule set that emulates the conditions we want to prepare for. And if they're allowed to improvise and come up with new ideas, they will rapidly develop new and better methods that you could never imagine. Other students will adopt those methods because they work, and the whole system will evolve and optimize organically. In combat sports, schools with a dogmatic approach are quickly surpassed by other schools. Allowing students to fail and make adjustments is essential. Otherwise they fail for the first time in the street, forcing them to improvise and escalate force. It's bloody hard to handcuff people. Let's give our cops better training.